one of the things, I don't think I've mentioned this on the air, so this is an exclusive. Not that anybody.
You heard it here first.
What I'm about to say.
All right, Ryan Fugit, Combat Story host, creator, Apache pilot, CIA operative, and corporate guy. Dad, husband, friend, veteran. I'll just keep going down the line of titles until you tell me I'm wrong.
That sounds right.
World-class athlete, spelling bee champion. You tell me when I'm off.
Wished he had been a SEAL like the host.
Until I met this guy, you're like, that's all they are? Yeah. Really? That's it?
Nice try, man. Nice try.
Hey, man, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time.
I'm so glad to be on, man, and returning the favor of you being on our show. So thank you.
Well, I don't say that lightly when I say I appreciate you being on, because I know you work a full-time job. And I think this is one of the fascinating parts of what I learned when I started following Combat Story and started listening to it on the drive home. I didn't know until I came on Combat Story with you that you worked a full-time job. I was like, oh, you had parlayed this into your full-time gig, but you work a 40-hour plus job a week. You got kids. So you have, this is totally a side hustle, yet you have built this thing into 107,000 subscribers. I'm going to read some stats here. You are in the top 0.5% of podcasts globally. You've had more than 12 million views, downloads, and listens. And in addition to having that 107,000 subscribers, and yet you only started the podcast like 6 weeks ago, and you've grown it into that since. So that's pretty amazing.
Not quite 2 years now. I wish that was a 6-week tally.
I want to talk about that journey and just pulling the thread a little bit about how you've gotten there and the ups and downs. And when you started this, did you envision it growing into this thing? Or the mission, at least on the combatstory.com website. So anybody looking to catch up doing Combat Story, search for Combat Story on YouTube or combatstory.com. The mission is to tell veteran stories, and that's really what you have stuck true to that mission. When you started this 2 years ago, did you think you'd be in this place right now?
No, I really thought my mom might listen. I knew my wife wouldn't listen. And she jokes with me regularly. She's only listened to one of 120 now, but she likes to say that she gets the my half of all of them because I'm so loud in our house when we're recording. She hears them all.
Maybe she'll listen to ours. Maybe she'll listen to this one because you're on the receiving end. Yeah.
Because you're funny. Yeah. So she might listen to that. Being in the top 5% of podcasts and knowing that it's still a side hustle is a pretty challenging stat to hear, that you can be doing well and still you can't make it your day job. So, and I know you know this well, like you do the same. You've got more than enough other jobs and you do this on the side. So you know that. But for me, I didn't expect to be anywhere near this.
Tell us the story about how it started. Obviously, you're a vet. You're an officer. You're a leader, pilot. When you got out, and then you're in the agency for long enough. What was the genesis where you're like, you know what, veteran stories aren't being told, or what was that genesis? Kind of fill us in.
Yeah, certainly there are a lot of podcasts that do this. I think when I started this in 2017, but I started recording them then, but I didn't release them until 2 years ago, right? So at that time, there weren't that many. And it was a learning from me when I left the military, when I left the Army after 7 or 8 years, I completely cut ties with the military. I was like, I want to get out of this and just go and be a normal person. And then, like many vets, just a few months go by and I hated that experience. And I left I left that community behind. And I was wrong to do that. And I went and joined the CIA and then spent 8 years there. And when I was thinking about getting out of the CIA, because my wife and I had decided that we wanted to settle down so that we could both have careers and the kids could have some stability. And I was trying to think of what am I going to do if I'm not playing G.I. Joe or like Peter Pan here? I have to grow up. And just putting pen to paper, I thought if I could just sit down and talk to vets every day, I'd be so happy. Like I spent a lot of time in the military and at the agency, just over a drink or dinner or whatever, breakfast, asking people about crazy stuff they did. because so much of it isn't ever documented, especially at the agency. Most of that stuff will never come out, and they're
Yeah.
fascinating stories. And I just love hearing them. So for me, it was to not make the same mistake I made when I left the Army. So to have that community, and I've created it. Like I feel like you and I, John, could be. I could call you up for suggestions on podcasting, the business, life. Like I feel like we're connected because of that. And I have 120 folks I've interviewed now, and I feel like I have that relationship. I think there was a little bit though when I came up with this idea, I was deployed for the agency, away from the family again,
Yeah.
probably like year 4 of being gone. And there's just a little bit in this that I hope some politician listens to, not so that they don't send us downrange again, but they just have a little more understanding of the long tail effect of committing us to something like that. I know a lot of us would go back and do it again. I'm not discarding that, but I just feel like there's a lot that you don't see when you watch Top Gun. Although it's awesome, there's
Hmm.
so much more that goes into it, and the challenges that I wanted people to see. And talking to folks like you, they come up.
What do you know now about interviewing vet stories? Not about being a podcaster. What do you know now about being on that side and drawing out vet stories that you didn't know when you started this?
I was heavily influenced by Hollywood when I was growing up. Books,
Mm. Yeah.
we talked about it. Dick
Hmm.
Marchenko, Top Gun. I'm sure for you, Navy SEALs and The Rock. But
Yeah,
for
for
me, not
sure.
Firebirds, which if you haven't seen, sadly, is Nicolas Cage's attempt to make a Top Gun movie with Apaches. But the reason I say this is I know I was influenced by that. I didn't realize how many vets were influenced by the glamour of what we see and read all
Oh
the
yeah.
time. I think there's that. The other thing that I also experienced myself, but didn't know how many other folks experienced this was at some point, I think when you're doing the work that we had done, to be very good at it or to make it through, you almost have to have this mindset that I could die doing this because you've seen somebody else die or get hurt in training or in combat. And you kind of have to make peace with that idea. And I think it changes you fundamentally. So that's one of the things I felt that, and it's come out quite a bit with the interviews.
Did you feel that uh, in the service and then again a second time when you joined the agency?
Because of the order of operations there, like I experienced it in the military, and I don't know if it ever leaves you. Like I think you can cope with it better. And this isn't, I'm not tying it directly to PTSD. I think you just have to have a mindset shift that many people don't understand, where you're like, I'm probably going to die or I could die and it's okay. All my affairs are in order. And,
Yeah.
it's just a different way of looking at things. The agency isn't quite like that. They're in harm's way. And that's one of the things I hope that people glean from our discussions, that I felt like they're the same people I was with in the military, just wearing a different uniform. And they do go in harm's way, and a lot of time they're on their own, but it's not the same intense combat and danger that you see. So it's a
Yeah.
slightly different mindset. So maybe I would have had that if I hadn't been in the military, depending on the
Mm.
deployments I had. But I think I would tend to guess it's more of a military related or combat focused experience.
Did you so you operated on the front lines, you deployed to Afghanistan, you were involved in some pretty high intense situations in Afghanistan. You kind of know what you're going into as a pilot in a fast attack helicopter. That's what you're there for. The CIA is naturally secretive about what you're doing. So you join ops at some point, and to become an operative, which is a very nebulous term for what it is people are doing. I think again, Hollywood sensationalizes and totally mischaracterizes what a CIA agent does. Was there eye-opening moments when you finally got in and got through training, through your like case officer training and stuff? Was there eye-opening moments where you're like, this is not at all what I expected? Not in a good or bad way, just not all I expected? Or were there moments where you were like, this is not all what I expected, because it was like deflating or it was surprising, or one way or another?
Yeah, I felt like, first of all, it is kind of a black box, and
Yeah.
unless maybe your parents served in there, you probably don't know anything about it. And my parents were State Department, so they were around agency folks their whole career, and so I knew of them and heard some stories.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of an understanding, but not that much. I think what was surprising for me, and clearly the same is true in the military, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I hated being in garrison in the Army. I hated it. Like,
Yeah.
especially as a commander, what are the boot sizes for my company? Like, I don't care about that. Like, I just want to be downrange doing stuff. So you still get that and the paperwork side. I think what I really liked about the agency, though, even if you're at headquarters, not in the field, you're still working on stuff that is absolutely at the forefront of every newspaper in the world at any given time. And I thought that was really, I don't know, maybe I kind of expected that, but that was a lot of fun. We're not carrying guns all the time, so that was a letdown, unless you're downrange. But yeah, I would just say that I wasn't too surprised by that secrecy side of it and like the impact, but I really loved that. I enjoyed the hell out of that work.
And it's interesting because your parents knew a little bit about the black box, and a lot of times, when you pull back the curtain, you're like, wait, that's it? Like in my time in SDVs, you and I talked about it, my time in the SEAL delivery vehicle, like I was in a very, very classified environment, and I was like, wait a minute, that's classified? Like who in the world gives a shit about that? Like, and then and so there's almost like a sad trombone sound a little bit where you're like, that's, I thought it was going to be like, Tom Clancy level shit. Like they're going to be like, oh, here's where the bodies are buried. Oh, by the way, here's how JFK really went down, and you're like, wait a minute, that's it? Like the speed, like whatever, the engine rotation speed of the Army F-145. And you're like, that's what I learned by having a top secret clearance. So I wonder if there was moments where you're like, hey, really? So that's it?
Absolutely. So I do think there's a little bit of that. Now I did go into our the counterterrorism center there is pretty cool at headquarters, as you would imagine, like drone footage from all over the world, flat screens, hellfires on the walls.
Yeah,
that's a cool place to be. A lot of the other parts of that job are just look like any other office anywhere. Now, the secrets that you learn, yeah, I mean, some of them you think, do we really need to classify this for as long as we do? But we understand why we do it. On the flip side, there's a lot of stuff that you work on that isn't going to come out for 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I occasionally, and one of the things I really think back on from that time was if I had stayed in the Army as an Army officer for 25 years, I still would not have been in meetings that I was in as a junior agency officer. So like I would go with 3 and 4-star generals from other countries to meetings, and the US military would kick out like 2-star generals out of the meeting. So it was just like 4 of us talking, and I'm a lowly government person, but I was the expert on whatever that topic was at that point in time. So I was in the room for it. So like that kind of thing, or carrying money across borders, like in a briefcase or hidden compartments and different things like that stuff was pretty cool and does exist, but certainly there's the mundane.
I don't think the average Joe or Sally on the street realizes, and this is a little bit of like some Tom Clancy kind of stuff, right? But it's real. I don't think the average person realizes how influential the intelligence community is writ large, whether it's the FSB, the Russian former KGB, or the Israeli intelligence services, or the U.S. intelligence services, how influential they are in creating circumstances. And it's really interesting the way you characterized it, that you said, like the stuff that's on the front page, either we were working on it reactively or we had created the conditions for that to happen.
So that's a great point. I mean, without getting into the title, I'm watching a documentary with my kids, a couple of them that are out now, on stuff that we went in to brief like senior heads of state on. And we were in briefings for various reasons, but like we were sitting at the forefront of these events that had just unfolded around the world that were front page news everywhere. Um, and some of the stuff like what the agency does incredibly well
Mhm.
that I think the military's good at, but I have never seen anything like it, like the agency. They pass down oral history incredibly well. So
Really?
they dedicate time to sit around, like do brown bag lunches. And like you see these in corporate America, but
Yeah.
they've never been the same for me, even in Silicon Valley, where you go in and you listen to somebody. Like you would go in and have a packed conference room listening to some guy who was deputy chief of station of some place when a coup went on. And he's like, here's what we did. Like the coup is starting. Here was the tripwire. Here are the assets we had to go get a hold of.
Wow.
Here's the intel we started reporting. We got families out here. We had to create, safe houses. We had to leverage these safe houses or escape routes. Super interesting and sharing those lessons. Now, I've heard them a couple times. Actually, one of the women we interviewed was Kim Campbell, who was an A-10 pilot.
Yeah.
Call sign was Killer Chick.
Just released a book like the last week, I think.
Yeah, she did. Awesome, like #1 on Amazon in a couple categories. So she had a surface-to-air missile hit in an A-10 and landed it.
Yeah.
But she had to go into this thing that she called manual reversion, which I'd never heard of, but it's a particular flight profile when you've got some damage to the aircraft.
Okay.
And she said the reason she landed it is because during one of their drinking sessions, she heard a guy talk about having to land it. There's no like emergency procedure in the book for it.
Really?
So the importance of like passing down that knowledge and how you then next time you're involved in a coup in another country, how you react, you go back to like, oh, I was eating my bologna sandwich listening to this guy talk about this thing 2 years ago.
That's interesting. I think there's a lesson for corporate America there on the value of everybody tries to create these lessons learned databases and portals as if anybody has the time to go and be like, hey, my client has this problem. I'm going to go back and research in the library, the robust library. I'm going to search these keywords. Has anybody ever have a project where they had to do they had to create a new database and install a new software system. Like nobody does that, right?
No.
But it's interesting through the oral history, almost going back to like a Navajo kind of, how they pass down their oral history. It's fascinating to hear that I think that's an underrated thing in corporate America, maybe in a lot of government agencies as well.
And what's interesting, and a lot of people don't know this, when we go to our training for operations type work at the farm, I mean, there's a bar there, and it's a central point of what you do at the agency. Like you got to go and meet people in different places. And so after training, like when you got a break, you'll go to the bar and there are a lot of people going through there, not just students for the farm, but like doing advanced training, all kinds of other stuff. And so you'll just sit there and a guy will be transiting like he's coming back from some Eastern European country, and they'll just talk about like, this is what's going on the ground. And it's a small, especially compared to the Army, probably like the SEALs, I would say, like a much smaller community. So you get to know people and you can kind of understand where they're coming from, but you just hear these like real lessons that are happening, which I haven't quite experienced elsewhere yet.
Wow. That's, that's not the lesson I thought we were going to take away from this podcast, but I think there's a huge value for people listening going, you know what, we've had this, library of lessons learned that have, if we went through the history, we would see not a single employee has ever actually gone in there and looked for it. Maybe that's something we need to do. I will tell you a very quick story that I think you'll appreciate. I was going through a training course put on by the SEAL teams to teach us how to link up with people who wanted to share information with us. And it was in an area that was very close to the farm, which is also in an area that's very close to where the State Department trains their people to do meetups and things like that. So we were walking through this area, just leave it vague, and it was so obvious that there were trainees from all these 3 different agencies, all chasing the rabbit, all chasing their targets that they were trying to get down. And everybody, you want to talk about being in an area, it was almost comical. It was almost like a bad 80s sitcom about like spies. It was like the old Dan Aykroyd Spies Like Us.
That's a great
because
movie, by the way.
dude, it's just totally a great movie. But we're walking through this town, and you could tell that this guy's following this guy, and then you're like, am I supposed to be following it? Am I following the wrong guy? And then you look and there's a guy following you, and you're like, I know he's not in the SEAL teams. Like, who the fuck is following me? And then am I following the wrong guy? And it was in every cafe you went in to do a link up with an individual. You're like, everybody, there's one seat in the back that's perfect for doing like, meetups that are out of sight, and everybody's already taken that table, and you're like, this everybody else in this town is just going about their day having no idea that there's 3 different agencies all training with their new recruits coming through here.
That's right.
So
That's so true.
Kind of comical, right? But
it's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible feeling dragging or running into someone else's surveillance bubble, or dragging a bubble through someone else.
Yeah, through someone else's. I'm totally right. We'd be crossing the street and they'd be like crisscrossing. You're like, but in terms of surveillance detection, you really it was a cool opportunity to be on the outside, playing the role of watch, trying to chase your rabbit, but you could see other surveillance operations going on. You're like, that is much more. If I look like that, I'm much more visible to somebody doing surveillance detection than I thought I would. So it really made you up your game about taking it very seriously. And we had been briefed on the fact that, the Russians, the Chinese, there was a lot of very good surveillance or counter surveillance organizations out there that if you think you're being good, you better up your game, because they're even better than that. So that was
so true.
So take me back. I was going to skip forward, but you start the podcast, you start bringing on some guests. It grows. Is there a point where you're like, ooh, boy, this is getting out of hand? Or has it just been 120 guests? You're putting out an episode. For those who don't know, putting out an episode, it's not just recording and then it magically happens, right? You got to record it. You got to do some editing. You got to do some production. You have to do some marketing. And yet you have kids and a full-time job. You're putting out a podcast once a week. You've put out 120 episodes plus. Is there a point where you start to grow, where you're like, ooh, I really kind of got in over my head? Or
I hope I get to that point. I mean, it is a lot of work, obviously, as you just described. And I think, like most things, you get to the point where you understand it well enough that you can outsource it effectively, some of the work. I am at a point where I will say earlier on, probably around, I don't know, my 10th episode or so, where we had a Delta operator on, like really got some traction. So there were a few early episodes that kind of propelled us. But I am at the point where we're making enough money, we can invest it back into the podcast. And so one of the things, I don't think I've mentioned this on the air, so this is an exclusive. Not that anybody.
You heard it here first.
What I'm about to say.
Everybody's leaning in. This better be good.
We're doing a documentary on the podcast. So we're re-interviewing 12 guests, and we're interviewing 6 fans, like people who've been with us from the beginning.
Yeah.
A couple experts, and we're going to break it up into a 7 episode docuseries, really digging into actually going back to one of the first questions you asked me, like, what have I learned from doing this? So there's several things. So some of the episodes are dedicated to some of the commonalities that I've seen, but also really just digging into going beyond this idea that every experience is like a Top Gun movie, which it's not. There's a lot of pain and challenges that come with it, and trying to show that face, and then how the fans experience it too, whether they were former military or had never served, but just have an affinity and support for veterans, trying to really show that side of it. So I'm at a point where we can have like professional film crews go around the world to interview folks. And so that's fun, I want to keep building opportunities like that where I'm still connected with the community, and some of the growth has given us an opportunity to do that.
Do you get recognized outside of like when you're walking through town? Have you had anybody come up to you?
So that is interesting. Oddly enough, at work, I was on a call and somebody was like, "Whoa, you work here? I listen to this podcast all the time." And I was like, "Yep, I don't ever talk about it at the office though. So I just don't bring it up. I don't want
no
to
kidding.
think that." Yeah. So that was interesting, but no, not no stranger has ever come up to me and said, "Hey, are you Ryan?" Like that's never happened. But several folks who I know who have been in the military, the government,
Yeah.
have had like friend of ours who's a cop out west. He hopped in a car with a bunch of other cops and it was on the radio. Like one of our podcasts was on. He's like, I can't get away from you, man. I'm in a car listening to your voice again. So a couple of those.
Well, at 107,000 subscribers, brother, that's coming. There's a point where you're walking down the street. Do your kids know what you do? Do they know like about the podcast?
They do, yeah. So I've got like a little YouTube thing that they send you when you hit 100,000 subscribers that looks really nice. But when I hit 5,000, my then I guess 11-year-old carved one out of wood for me. Like combat story, 5,000 subs. And actually, my older son, who's 15 now, over the summers he edits my videos. So he's really into video production and that sort of thing. So they do that. They do think it's cool that their dad does YouTube. They constantly remind me that I am way behind Mr. Beast and I've got a long way to go. So that's not the greatest side of it, but they like this idea that I'm involved. And for me, I just like them occasionally hearing some of these stories about guys like you that we've interviewed.
Dude, if you had told me you were like your teenage kids were going to be listening to this, I would have curtailed my language. You got to give me a heads up on that one. That is really cool to hear that the kids are doing. And it is funny that they're like, Dad, how come you don't have a username? Why are you using just your real name? Your name need to be like Captain Shazam or whatever, like all these. My kids are always telling me about like they're like, I follow this YouTuber and they give me some name. I'm like, what? That's his name? They're like, well, no, everybody on YouTube has a username. I'm like, Ryan Fugit just uses Ryan Fugit. It's not the way it goes. Okay, we're a generation behind, my friend.
I talk to them when they'll watch me during the week doing email. They call it Email Simulator, which is my job. And then on Saturdays, they'll see me working on the podcast and how excited I am. And I'll always remind them like, hey, you can go this normal route and sit here every day during the week doing something for someone else, or you can go in there and record yourself doing something interesting and figure this out so you can do something fun for the rest of your life.
I actually, and I'm half kidding, but I'm half not. I actually do the exact opposite because my kids want to be a YouTuber. And I think parents that are listening to us will get this. Every kid, it's like when we were growing up. Oh, I'm going to be an NFL star, and your parents are like, hey, dude, you're 5'3" and you're 14 years old. That's not happening. But like my kids are like, oh, I'm going to be a gamer. I'm going to be a YouTuber. I'm just going to play video games. I'm like, no, that's not a real job. Oh, then I'm going to do funny stunts like the Dude Perfect guys and Mr. Beast. I'm like, no, guys, there's only like 3 people on the planet that do that and make money. You can't. So I do the opposite of trying to encourage my kids to be a YouTube star. But here I am now. Now I have to. I'd be like, God, you know what, Mr. Fugit's onto something.
You have a podcast. You're a stand-up comedian. You of all people should be the one who's like, hey, go do that, man.
All right, maybe I need to rethink my strategy. Maybe I'm. Yeah. Oh my God, did I just acknowledge that I become a corporate nug? God. I'm like, guys, no, you need to go work for the man for your entire life. In fact, go work in the mines. Like you really find pension. Go get your pension. Go work in the mines. You'll really find. Go to the factory floor and just stay there. One day you might rise to middle management.
Yeah. If anybody knew me 20 years ago, heard me saying that I was pushing my kids this direction, they'd be like, no, Ryan would never say that. I mean, I'm bad enough. I'm as serious as it can get as it is. And that's why I'm like, guys, don't be like me. Go do these other things.
All right. Well, you're going to have to come up with a username as well, because otherwise my kids aren't going to be impressed. They'll be like, Dad, what's it? I was like, I don't know. It's going to have some, like, whatever, like Count Dracula, something, some sort of, I think that one's already been taken, but some other username that's cool. Makes you sound more like Gen Z millennial.
That's right.
What would you say to somebody? Let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. What would you say to somebody who is looking to start a podcast or to build a social media channel Not that I'm not that I'm trying to put you in a hot seat as like a social media expert, but with 107,000 subscribers after 2 years, you seem to have something. You found some sort of recipe that's working. So what would you say to a guy who's trying to start a podcast?
So a little bit of advice that I got when I started, and we might circle back to this if I forget, John, but I started it way before we started releasing things because I kind of noticed what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of Tim Ferriss and his podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but
I have.
I really just admire what he does. I do long form just like he did, very little editing, so it's easy. It's a very little time commitment once the thing is done to get it out the door because I structured it that way. But he said when he started, he promised himself he would do 10 episodes. If everyone sucked, he would still do 10. So I took that same approach of I'm just going to give 10 a shot. And, if I don't like it after that, I'll stop. I have had people along the way say to me, you've interviewed like 100, 50 people, you've interviewed 50, there's no more stories to share. And I think if you've been in the military,
Wow.
That everybody's got a Hollywood story in them if they've ever been downrange. So I don't think that ends, but I just did an interview earlier today and like I'm amped when I'm doing that. My wife wants me to do this because I leave those things like a different person. I'm so excited and interested when I'm done. I just feel better about it. So to me, I really found something that just truly interests me. And so if you can commit to doing 10 of something that you actually like, not that you think other people might want to hear you talk
Yeah.
about, but like you really care about, I feel like that's the secret sauce. And to be clear, I'm horrible at social media. I don't really use it at all. I do the bare minimum to get stuff out there, and I suck at it. And we still, are able to get people listening because I think the content resonates with them. If I was better at social media, we'd have way more subscribers.
Yeah.
I'm bad there, and that's an area where I have to work. If I didn't have a day job, I'd invest way more time on the marketing side. But I don't have a big interest in it, so that holds me back. So I would just say like picking the thing that's interesting and committing to getting a few out of the door so you can work through the kinks early on is worth it.
So if I was going to summarize for kids that are listening, you don't have to be good at it, and you can do it as a side hustle, and you'll be successful. Is that the lesson that you were trying to put out there?
Yeah, I mean that was the experience.
I'm kidding.
For me.
I'm totally kidding.
Yeah.
There you go, kids.
Man, you just pay a couple $100, get some equipment, do something you're interested in, side hustle that thing.
But you did say, and embedded in what you said was, hey, you got to be passionate about it, and you got to put in the time. You got to again, you didn't use the word sacrifice, but embedded in what you said was, hey, man, like I have a day job and I have kids. This is all aside from that. Passion's fine. You can be passionate about something, but if you're not willing to put in the work into the side hustle, it might become a burden. It might become a drag. It might never take off. And then you're going to be frustrated that it didn't take off. You've got to be willing to put in that. And there's a great book that's eluding me right now. I think it might be called The Side Hustle, or no, I'll put it up on our social media, but there's a great book that talks about how to take a side hustle and really figure out what you're willing to commit to make it happen. But
I got to say, man, to that point, if I could just build on that, the hardest thing I think, and I'd be curious how you see this, John, because you're doing the same thing. The hardest thing for me is the trade-off with family. I feel like, pretty terrible when I'm working on this, when I could be doing something with my boys. Now, my wife is very quick to remind me that a lot of the time they don't want to spend time with us anyway. They want to play their games and do their thing. So it's probably not that bad that I spend a couple hours on the weekend on this. But to me, I feel like 15 years from now, when they're out of the house, I'm going to regret not having more time with them. So that's the one thing for me that hurts. Obviously, we get people who comment into the videos and you've seen it, but people who will write to me directly and we've helped them avoid killing themselves and given them a new perspective on life. Like that stuff helps balance it, but for me, the family side is the hardest part.
Do you share those kind of moments with the kids and say, hey guys, just so you know, I want to be spending time with you, but the reason I give up some of my time with you is because of this. And if you guys leave nothing else in this world, it's a legacy of making the world a better place. And for this one person who wrote in, I may have made a little bit of a difference. Do you share those stories or?
Yeah, I had a heart. So I would say with all of them now, no. So I've got a 10, 13,
Sure.
and 15-year-old, all boys.
Sure.
15-year-old, though, like 6 months ago, we had a heart to heart. And this was one of the things, like,
Yeah.
what are you giving back to other people in this world? So we live a very privileged life. We
Yeah.
have good jobs, my wife and I, like all of our family's healthy, living parents, like everything is, we're in a good spot. So just reminding him of, hey, you got your day job to some effect, but we can probably do a little bit more to help people. And so that's part of the reason that I'm not around as much doing this, is so that we can try to help. And here are some of the things people have said. Now he knows because he's helped me with this and he's seen these comments himself. But I feel like those are discussions that I have when there's kind of that 14 to 15 year
Sure.
age.
Yeah, when they're of age to kind of grasp it and not traumatize them.
That's right. But I still play Fortnite with them. All right, John? Like I'm in there in the trenches with them. So we'll multiplayer some Fortnite. And so I'm earning my street cred with them, you know, when I'm not doing this.
All right. Way to go, nerd. I actually, my kids have Fortnite. I played one time and I didn't know. There was too many buttons. I literally sound like some old crotchety old man. I'm like, there's too many buttons on this thing. What am I supposed to do? Like I was like total old school, the old Nintendo would had like two red buttons and the two red buttons and the plus sign. I was like, what is this thing? There's too many buttons on this thing. Who invented this thing? Give me my walker. You know,
they got to be like, Dad, you're a SEAL. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Dad. What? And I got smoked. I got smoked in Madden and everything else. Yeah, which I think was, like when you play with your kids and you let them win, and they kind of know that, when you're playing, like it's like when your kids are like 3 years old and you're playing hide and seek with them, and they're hiding like right behind the curtain, and you can see their feet, and you have to pretend like you don't know where they are. They kind of know. This was that first moment I think my kids had where they're like, I don't think Dad's letting us win in Madden. I think we're literally kicking the shit out of him in Madden. I don't think Dad's pretending to not know what to do with this controller. He literally doesn't have a clue.
Yeah. Great.
So yeah, nobody tells you about this before you have kids, what you can expect from dad life. All right, man. Well, last question for you. What's next? Like what's the future of the podcast? I know you said you have the documentary coming on. What do you want to do? Where do you see it going? What's the big news?
I don't know if I have a great plan to get there. Certainly the documentary is just another interest and not too far of a departure. I think there's a little bit where I'd like to do more in-person sit downs, not just interviews, but maybe activities with veterans together. Yeah. And I don't mean like just going to a bar, but some crazy stuff, maybe like some Dude Perfect stuff out there, not trick shots, but some of the things that they put together. Like I'd love to get some veterans together and go do some crazy things and just have like a professional crew record it, get some of the audio of the things that are said. I think that's kind of where I'd like to be at some point. Like if I could do this as a living where I'm interviewing folks and spending time with veterans one-on-one, like that'd be gravy. Well,
you're getting a couple hundred subscribers at a time, so you're definitely on your way. What's it like to be on that side of the interview? Is it weird?
It is for me. I say this every time I'm interviewed. This is the worst side to be on for me. I am well aware that I am, like, you are a gifted storyteller. I am not. I can't set things up. Like my wife is often saying like, hey, you need to really work on how you deliver stories. And I do. I need to. There are some guys who could just come on and they'll tell me before we hit record. I'm sure you've had this, John, where they'll say, you just ask me a question, kick your feet up for 2 hours and we'll be done. Like they're just going to take it and run. I don't have that gene. So I do feel uncomfortable on this side. And the CIA trained me to be in the other seat, to ask the questions. Like,
sure.
I've gotten formal training on how to do that. Being on this side is just not as comfortable for me.
All right, I'll give you an opportunity to riff. What's last one? What's something about you that we would not learn from your resume?
Dude,
You got a riff now. You're a CIA operative. Like you should be like, and you can make it up. You can be like, I won the Miss America pageant when I used to, whatever. I dressed up as a woman and I tricked.
No. I mean, you kind of led me. I wasn't thinking this. Now I got to. Well, here, this is a good one. I've had Channing Tatum's hands on my butt. So the actor Channing Tatum, he and I played football together. He was the QB, I was the center for 2 years.
Wait, for real? In high school?
Yeah. We went on different paths. I went into college in the military. He went on to be a stripper and then be the main guy cast in G.I. Joe. So
yes,
we found the same military side eventually.
He went on to play guys like you.
That's right.
Wait, he was the QB and you were his center?
That's right. Yeah. So this was 8th and 9th grade. It's Florida. So Florida has junior high is 8th and 9th grade, and then you go to high school in 10th. So we were there were 3 8th graders who started on the 9th grade team. So me, him, and this one other guy. So we played then. And then in our 9th grade year, we played together. And I still remember, he's a very good dude. And I still remember against our rival, our huge junior high rival, where my wife was a cheerleader. While she was watching, we were tied up right at the end. We were going to kick a field goal. We had to kick a field goal to win. And I was the long snapper in this case. He was the holder. And I muffed the snap. He picked it up and ran it in to score and saved my ass on that one and many other occasions. But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun couple years. And then we played against each other in high school. We went to separate high schools.
Have you ever told him like you're welcome for giving him an opportunity to go run it in and be the hero? Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you're the real hero here because you gave him an opportunity to be the hero. Is that how you would
Magic Mike without that moment, basically, is what we're talking about.
You're welcome for all your success, Channing Tatum.
Next time I see him, I'll let him know.
All right, bud. Hey, combatstory.com, on YouTube, Combat Story. Ryan Fugit on Fugit on LinkedIn. And thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for spending your Friday night with us, bud.
This was fun, man. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I appreciate you tolerating sitting on that side of the interview seat.
Easy with you on the other side, man.
Thanks, bud.